Hello and welcome to this Mastering the Machine Automation Academy webinar for the 15th of October 2022. Today's topic was the Vision Show and machine vision in general. The Vision Show was held in Boston, Massachusetts, October 11th through 13th, 2022, and this was my tour of the show. Thanks, hope you enjoy it. Good morning and welcome to this Mastering the Machine webinar from the Automation Academy for October 15th, 2022. And our topic today is going to be a report on the Vision Show, which is a machine vision show in Boston, Massachusetts that I attended earlier this week. I was actually on vacation, but managed to attend the show and check out some of the exhibits. So that's what I'll be talking about today. And there'll be some information on machine vision in general. So we'll be talking about a few different topics. First, we'll get some of the basics out of the way. What is Mastering the Machine itself? It is named after a document that I called Mastering the Machine back in 2013, and it's about specifying machinery, that sort of thing. And it's evolved into this website that includes these webinars with the same title, Mastering the Machine, from the Automation Academy. What is the Automation Academy? The Automation Academy is a membership site that I opened, I guess coming up on 2 years ago, with training videos on it for PLC programming, that sort of thing. There's some job and aptitude assistance, systems integration topics, big library of documents, technical documents, including a lot of things extracted from my books. There is a community with interest groups. It's called IO Central, and I have done a previous webinar on that. It is open to the public. Pretty much anybody can sign up for IO Central and get some free information there and interface with their peers, that sort of thing. And we do these regular events, the Mastering the Machine webinars. And so if you want to check some of that out, you can look here on automationllc.com. You can either check out the Academy or IO Central link. As far as the show itself, so this show occurred this past week, Tuesday through Thursday in Boston. And I had attended this show about 22 years ago, and I was really surprised at some of the things that I learned. I was a big DVT integrator back in the 90s. DVT was a very popular vision system at the time. And so since I was involved in a lot of different machine vision applications and things, I figured I would go attend the show up in Boston. And I learned a lot of things, and I'll be covering some of those things here during this webinar. A lot of the things that I learned back then are still true about the Vision Show. So one of the first things that I want to kind of discuss here, probably most people who do machine vision are familiar with these two companies, right? Cognex, probably the biggest player, at least in North America, for machine vision, and Keyence, right? Keyence vision systems are a little bit different. They're not the smart cameras that Cognex has. They are little, systems that are kind of controllers with individual cameras plugged into them. And this is what most people think of. The thing that was surprising at this show is neither of these companies were present at the Vision Show. Now you would think, okay, such big companies and machine vision is important, and Cognex is from Boston, and they did not even have a booth at this show. And this was true 20 years ago also. And DVT didn't have a booth 20 years ago. And this, I think, was before they were owned by Cognex. Cognex bought DVT and shut them down, kind of incorporated their software into their platform. It's now what you call EasyBuilder. So neither one was there. So what was there, right? Well, that's what I'll be talking about. Before I do that, I do want to give you a quick overview here. Let me see if I've got this up. These two documents are available in the Automation Academy, and they are basically just these are examples of things that are in the library. So there is a general thing here on machine vision. I went through a lot of details on how machine vision works, that sort of thing. So all this is downloadable, and it talks in general about how machine vision works from a very basic standpoint, and talks about the lighting and things like that. So that's what you're seeing here. And then I also did create another document specifically on Cognex, because most companies in the US probably are most familiar with that and use their products. And it can be a little bit overwhelming when you look at all the different numbers and things, right, describing their products. What do they all do? So what I did here is I went through all their different products, including some of the old ones and the different series, and explained what they are. So those two documents are available in the library, and I don't mind sending them to people if people email me. But in general, they're part of my membership site. So there are 24 documents in the library extracted directly from my industrial maintenance and troubleshooting book, which came out earlier this year. Okay, so names you may recognize that were at this show that did not include, right, Keyence and Cognex. Teledyne DALSA. This is a big vendor from Germany that sells lots and lots of cameras. They're a little bit less expensive than Cognex, and they have a pretty broad offering, but they're not widely used in the United States, which is probably why they were at the Vision Show, right? They're trying to drum up new business. Another one, SICK Optic. So SICK, it's kind of a strange name, right, for people who aren't familiar with that, but they do cameras in addition to things like floor scanners and photoelectric sensors and things like that. They also have vision systems. So they were there advertising their products. Interesting that both of them, big names, were from Germany, and there were a lot of German companies at the Vision Show. Other names you may recognize here. Balluff. Balluff actually does have vision systems also. One of the things that I thought was interesting, they had a kind of a kiosk, and I don't really have a picture of it here, but it had 4 cameras, one on each side of the kiosk, and they scanned the people walking around the kiosk itself and created a point cloud of just 3-dimensional points showing kind of where the people were around the edge of this this kiosk. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So they weren't so much focusing on their standard machine vision systems. They were talking about this matrix vision, which was the kind of more of a 3D modeling application, software and hardware that went with that. So matrix vision was the name of that platform. Murr Electronics was there, and they were more talking in terms of connectivity than they were in terms of cameras. I think they were using some third-party vision systems there, but they were showing how all the cameras and things can communicate with each other. So pretty big names there, SICK Optic and Balluff, Murr, things like that. There were a lot of people there that you wouldn't recognize the name of. PCAT Vision. I thought that was a cute name. It's like peek at something, right? Peek at something. So that was kind of a strange name. And they were concentrating on very specific things. I don't remember exactly what this image represented, but it looks like kind of blob tools. They were looking at something and analyzing what that is. People who are familiar with machine vision would understand what blob tools are. You can look at shapes and you can classify them by different, whether they're long and skinny, and classify them by size and things like that. VCOW was another one. They were using their vision systems a lot in the life sciences industry. I do a lot of work for a company that builds machines for life sciences companies, and they mostly use Cognex. So this would be something, I suppose, that would compete with the Cognex platform and things like that. This JAI, I don't remember anything, again, specifically about their product. There were probably at least 100 different booths at the Vision Show. There were a lot of them, not all for vision and not all for smart cameras, things like that. A lot of the products were, everything from connectivity and cables to software, to all the different components of vision systems, lenses, lots of lens manufacturers there, things like that. So components of a vision system. People are probably familiar with something like a Cognex camera, which contains all these things in one, right? You can actually, your processor, your frame grabber, the camera itself, the lens would be screwed into the front of the camera. They don't build that into the camera as such. It's always removable. But then they even include lighting, right? You can buy Cognex cameras with lighting. I think I have a picture. Let me see. I'll drag this back over here. There's an example of the Cognex camera that includes all of those components, right? The lens, this little housing, which actually can move the lens back and forth and includes lighting, filters, lenses, covers. The communication is in the back of the camera. The I/O is built into the camera, but you can buy all these things separately also. And that's what this is showing. So some of the pictures that I show you here will be things like just a frame grabber. And a frame grabber captures the image and then loads it into the image processor. And you can do things like adjust your shutter speed, how fast you're going to access things. And it turns it into a readable image, and then takes that readable image, from upper left to lower right, depending on the resolution of the camera, and then processes it and turns it into usable information via this software. So all these things can be bought separately. And that's I think that's the biggest surprise I got from the first time that I went to the Vision Show back in around the year 2000, was that there were a lot of companies there selling all these individual components. Of course, I expected lens and lighting to be a separate manufacturer, but there were a lot of people just selling just a camera, or just a frame grabber, or just a processing unit, right? At that time, the only software manufacturer I remember seeing back in 2000 was a company called Matrox. And I'm going to show you their booth. There's a little bit of surprise associated with that also. Nowadays, there is vision software called OpenCV. And I'm not sure what the CV stands for, but anybody can use that. And I asked somebody there why there's not more software vendors at this show. And they said, well, people can, get OpenCV free, and then they can build their own tools. And Matrox still was there, and they provided some of the tools. And there were people who had built special software to interface with the cameras, but there weren't a lot of people selling just specifically software there. There was one that I'll show you their booth a little bit later, but there were people selling, like I showed Murr Electronic, they showed the I/O, right? They had just I/O units and communication units, things like that. Lighting manufacturers, Advanced Illumination had a booth there. Lots of lens manufacturers. Probably the most represented product was lenses. All the major, Minolta and Konica and all the people that sell lenses for regular cameras also had booths there for that. And then there was something kind of new. They use Gig-E cameras now, which is Ethernet at gigabyte speed cameras. And that's becoming very popular for machine vision. And so there were a lot of people selling individual cameras, which is represented here. Lenses. Here's some of the lens manufacturers that I mentioned before. These are some kind of obscure ones here. I hadn't ever heard of Kowa or Moritex, or those names. I had seen Konica and Minolta, like I said, but hadn't seen these names represented. But this particular lens, you can see how huge this thing is. So this may be what they call a C mount or S mount type lens here, but then it has this giant attachment attached to it here. And this is probably a telecentric lens here. And I have another picture of a company that was just representing telecentric lenses. Telecentric lenses, the idea there is to make the lens opening itself as large as you can to get rid of some of the parallax issues that you may see. Let me see if I've got a picture of my parallax here. Show you a little bit of what that looks like. I'm on another page. That's why it's We've got a picture that kind of illustrates that. Here we go. So parallax is kind of represented by this. If you were to look at something very close up, you would expect, for instance, that everything would be straight and represented like this, but the center of your eye is actually farther from the edges of an object than it is to the middle of an object. So things in the middle of your field of view are very accurate, but when you get to the outside, things get distorted, right? And that's kind of shown here. What this is, and this is available. This is, I think, a Cognex picture here that has been, modified and has some formulas and things here. But this explains a little bit of how parallax works, and a telecentric lens reduces that quite a bit by making the opening of the lens really large like that. So Moratex was advertising a bit of that. And you can see here somebody that's just talking about specifically those lenses here. Lighting, as I mentioned before, advanced illumination is probably one of the biggest players in that area. And several of these images are from their booth, right? These are all three of these are Advanced Illuminations booths. This company here, Smart Vision Lights, it turns out they are the manufacturer for most of the lights that Cognex sells, right? So if you go buy lights directly from Cognex, a lot of times they're made by this company. And if you were to go to this company directly and you had a large quantity of lights you wanted to buy, you probably would get them at a better price than you would getting them from Cognex. And then some of your distributors also distribute for this company, Smart Vision Lights. This booth down here I thought was very interesting. This was, and I don't remember the name of this company, but all they made was the lens covers, or basically light covers, right, for LED lighting. So all these little plastic pieces just go over the LED lights and then amplify them. Sometimes people call these Fresnel lenses. That's what I believe this one here is. It has a bunch of little circles in it, and it kind of evenly spreads the light over something. Some of these lenses may focus the light on something. So a company like this makes these accessories. They don't even sell the lights themselves. They just sell the accessories. And the only way they're going to make a lot of money from a trade show like this is to get a customer that orders a whole lot of these things at once, right, by the thousands. They're not going to sell the onesie twosies, but they may sell them through distribution. So there were a lot of different lighting products represented here. Nowadays, most of your lighting is LED. When I attended the show years ago, LED lighting wasn't as widespread. It was quite expensive at the time. So there was a lot of other types of DC lighting. It is really important that your lighting is DC and doesn't have an AC component to it. I think I explained that in a previous webinar, where you would see if you grab a bunch of images, you'd see the images get really light and really dark and really light at a 60 hertz rate, right? And so as you capture your images, your lighting wouldn't be consistent. That's why I use DC lighting. Well, nowadays, most of that DC lighting is LED based, and LEDs are a lot cheaper, and a lot of people make these different types of lighting arrays. But I thought this was interesting here anyway, with these little just plastic components. Lots of different types of boards and widgets. A lot of them were either the manufacturer of the cameras themselves, and you can see this here showing the little ribbon cables that would attach to a image acquisition board or a frame grabber, and then the camera hanging on the end of it. I think I showed this in a previous webinar also, where I had some little cameras that interface with Raspberry Pi. Right, Raspberry Pi is a little standalone computer. It's less than $100 computer. We've talked about a lot here before, and there are cameras you can buy for those. And I thought I was buying one camera, and I paid $18, for what I thought was one camera, and it came in a package, and there were 4 of them in there. So I was getting the camera themselves, which just looks like a little button on a board with a ribbon cable, kind of like this on a miniature scale. And I got 4 of them for $18. So the image acquisition part of the camera itself is actually pretty inexpensive. And I want to say the resolution of those was probably 640 by 480, and they were $4.50 with a ribbon cable attached. So the basics of the camera, right? You can build your own system, as I explained before, and buy all these individual components and put your own things together. For example, this item, I don't know if you can see my pointer here, but there's a little camera showing, and this was from a distributor's case. And that distributor mentioned that this particular camera was $500. Contrast that with the Cognex that I showed you before. And I want to say these cameras are probably at least $3,500 to $5,000. So very expensive comparatively. So if you want to build your own system, you can buy all these individual little widgets and things and ribbon cables and plug them into your own boards and do it for a lot less expensive than a package system like a Cognex or Keyence. And that may be why Cognex doesn't bother showing up for this. They probably figure the people that are showing up are either trying to, invade their space like Teledyne does, or that people are there to just see the individual little components like these, right? The little individual cameras. There's a frame grabber advertiser, and they had some frame grabbers inside of the case also. And some of these items down here, this is probably a frame grabber or a communication card. I think this here is a frame grabber for multiple cameras. That's what you're seeing there. There were integrators there. So a lot of service providers, that would be people that do lots of vision applications. So my old company that I ran from 1996 to 2006, I did about 180 cameras worth of vision systems, some of them multiple cameras. At the time, like I said, DVT was very popular. So out of 180 cameras, at one point, I can't count it up, probably 160 of them were DVT. And DVT is now gone. So imagine what happens for people that install a system built on a platform that is no longer in existence. What do? Do you migrate to a new platform like a Cognex or whatever, or do you just keep replacing your DVT cameras with other old DVT cameras? That's always an issue, right? So there is something to be said for the open source platforms like OpenCV and things like that. So this Bodkin, I had never heard of either one of these, Pleora or Bodkin. They were probably from the Northeast. And so Boston's close. And so they decided to go there and check that out. I see I have a chat message. Let's see. Is this the open source vision software you referenced? Yes, that is it, James. So is this the open source vision? HTTPS opencv.org. Absolutely. And you can get that. Most of it, I would say, is free. Phil Scruggs has been on here before. I don't think he's on here today. Let me see if I can see who's here. And I don't see him. But Phil uses OpenCV quite a bit. So he would know quite a bit about that. And he's done some demos. He's been on 2 or 3 of my webinars before and shown the machine vision applications that he's worked on. And he said, yeah, the OpenCV he's used it with Raspberry Pi and just plugged an inexpensive little camera into it and done facial recognition, right? And infrared temperature sensing using OpenCV, and was able to build a kind of a COVID detector, right? It would detect people that were hot and then memorize their profile and tell whether they were COVID positive. Theoretically, I don't think I would rely on that too much, but anyway, these were some of the integrators, yes, and chances are they have made their own software, or they use something like a Cognex. Let's see, who else? Distributors. This one's a big one. Every time I go to the Northeast, I run into Gibson Engineering, which uses a whole lot of Cognex. And I think somebody coined the term once, a disreputor. In other words, they're a distributor and a rep and an integrator. And that's kind of a funny play on words there, but they will do jobs also. So some of the vendors will actually do machine vision applications for you. And what that does is it can kind of upset the integrators that are in the area, because their distributor that is selling their product can also take some of the work away from them, right? By doing the jobs. And so some of the systems integrators are less likely to use that particular vendor. Now, this phase one, I had a good talk with one of the reps at phase one, and he showed me a lot of the different components. I believe this was one of phase one's shelves. And so he was the guy that told me, well, this camera here is only $500 as compared to the Cognex camera that was much more expensive. So if you wanted to build your own system, you could probably do it for half or less the cost with an industrial system than you could with the Cognex system. So first vision and phase one vision were both very helpful as far as kind of educating me on some of the products out there right now. And so lots of guys at their booth talking about their different products. This was a little bit of a surprise here. I kind of titled this Other. As I mentioned, when I went to this show 20 some years ago, Matrox was the biggest player probably in machine vision. And they sold all the little widgets that you see there in the cases. They made software, and they made frame grabbers, and they made processors and lots of different things. And suddenly I go to this show and Zebra owns Matrox. Now that's a very strange pairing. I've done a lot of work with Zebra in the past, but Zebra was known for printers. That's really, you know, the main thing I would see them use in industry is they would have things like barcode printers, label printers for industrial applications. The thing that was they were notorious for, it was really hard to integrate Zebra printers with a PLC because there was no native interface. So you had to come up with your own converter. It was serial protocol, and then you had to write code that would actually format the label. Now they had software that would do that for you, but it was not compatible with a PLC. So if you had a PLC that had to create a label and you had to format it in the PLC, that was some of the hardest programming I've ever had to do. And then it turns out they bought Matrox. Well, maybe they bought them to enhance their software. I'm not really sure why. I looked at their application, but really didn't talk to anybody there. I think they were probably busy when I talked to them. But Matrox, as I said, was a major player back years ago. I think there's probably a lot of other companies that sell competing products. And so that's maybe why Zebra bought them up, or to appropriate their software, kind of like Cognex did when they bought DVT. Edmund Scientific, Edmund Optics. This is another major player. They sell lighting, lensing, a lot of the little widget components, and I get their catalogs probably twice a year, and they're advertised all the time in things like Photonics magazines. You would see a lot of their products. So if you ever need individual components, this is probably one of the major distributors you would go to, and they would sell things like the advanced illumination lighting that I talked about before, and of course lenses. Maybe you'd get your Konica or Minolta lenses from Edmund Scientific. So they're kind of like a distributor, but they're a one-stop shop for all the components. Other things represented there, software. This was the only software company that I saw there. And as you can see, they're advertising deep learning software, 3D vision software. In other words, you can get this OpenCV product yourself, but you would have to build the more complex tools. And unless you're a very good programmer, and I mean like not a PLC programmer, but more of a Python and C# type programmer, that would be very, very difficult. You would have to be very knowledgeable to be able to do that. So instead, you might go to a company like this and just buy their software. And this guy I talked to for a while, this guy standing here, and he was a total software geek, you know, just knew everything about C# and how they do all this stuff. I think he was kind of a German guy too. But deep learning software, which is much like I think I mentioned it before when we talked about Cognex, VIDI software. If you've ever heard of VIDI software from Cognex, that's some of their deep learning software. The way Cognex does it, though, is they just capture a whole bunch of images and then compare the images and classify them. These are good, these are bad, and it learns as you present new images. It categorizes those new images also as good or bad, and then puts them in families. And so it takes a lot of memory, a lot of space to do that. This company, I believe, does this without just saving all the images. That's one of the downsides I see to the VIDI software, is that you have to have, I don't know, 150 or 200 images in the library, and then it searches through those images to do the comparisons. This company uses different algorithms than that, similar to your typical machine vision tools, which just scan across the individual pixels and things to do that. So as I mentioned, this was the only actual full software company represented there. And these are the names of some of their software here. Halcon, Merlik, and DL Tool, just some of their products. Media companies, yes, Quality Magazine was there, and that makes sense because, of course, machine vision is typically used for quality control of some kind. Sometimes it's used for just capturing images and archiving them, but most of the time it's to make go and no-go judgments on products. That kind of makes sense. Standards companies. As a matter of fact, A3 International Vision Standards, you notice here it says A3 Vision and Imaging. That's one of the sponsors of the show. Actually, behind that is automate.org. That is actually the people who sponsored the show, which is, I believe, also Automate, the same show that is in Chicago. That's a different branch of this, but the vision and imaging branch is actually this standards company that was represented here. And you see some of the buzzwords here, the GIG-E cameras that I mentioned before. Not sure what this was, Link, I didn't read this, but USB Vision, well, they've kind of appropriated the, Universal Serial Bus acronym there for their vision. But these folks, I did briefly talk to one of the guys there, and of course, he didn't want to talk so much about all the software and things like that here that I was really here to investigate. Instead, he wanted to make sure that everybody was following the vision standards and following the rules that are laid down for how you do machine vision applications. So they were represented here also. This was probably the final area that I went to within the show itself. Other people that were here. So more media companies. This is Jake Hall. Some of you may recognize Jake as the manufacturing millennial. He's on LinkedIn extensively, and he was doing a podcast when I first got here, and he kind of made a face at me, which I thought was kind of neat. And then we got together a little bit afterward and took a picture here. But he was the only, live media person actually doing broadcasting from the show. And we've known each other for a bit, and so I went ahead and put his picture here. But he was actually sponsored by automate.org and paid to be at the show and do live podcasting. So I thought that was kind of neat. The other half of the show, so this was the vision show itself, covered about half the auditorium, and the other half was automated guided vehicles. And despite the fact that they were supposed to be mostly like these little robots that roll around, right? Little carts and have bins on them and things like that, you can see that some of the other robot manufacturers actually got in here and just put, cameras on their end of arm tooling and built little applications for that. So Yaskawa, big name in robotics, was there. And of course, GE Fanuc. GE Fanuc is probably the gorilla in the room for robotics. And of course, they have their own machine vision platforms. And I believe if you look down here kind of on the floor, right, on these applications, you will see a whole lot of little automated guided vehicles, little robots that roll around and do different things, follow tracks in the floor or use GPS systems to, crawl around your factory or whatever and move things around. And then, of course, your typical stationary robots. So that was the other half of the show. And there was quite a bit of machine vision there. You can see a camera sticking up here. And Schunk actually is a gripper manufacturer. So this looks like maybe a universal robot or a cobot, but this was advertising Schunk's grippers, which really doesn't have a lot to do with either machine vision or AGVs. So they just showed up at the show anyway, hoping, I guess, that they could get some attention from people interested in grippers. And then I took a picture of myself in front of the, actually my wife took a picture of this in front of the display, and it says here automate.org. So if you want further information about their other trade shows, this is where you would go to see that, the automate.org. And they put on the Automate show also up in Chicago. So that's mostly what I had to talk about today. Just kind of report on the Vision show itself. There used to be a lot of trade shows in this country. As a matter of fact, after I got out of college, I worked for a distributor and used to do 4 trade shows just in the state of Tennessee. It was important enough for that distributor to set up a booth in Knoxville and Nashville and Tri-Cities and Chattanooga, and I'm sure there was one in Memphis, but that was a little far. And we did 4 of those every year, plus we would attend other trade shows to learn about other products. And this was before you had the World Wide Web and you could just do all this stuff virtually. These physical trade shows were a big deal back in the day. They're less so now, I think, as of course the internet has sprung up. You can see all this stuff virtually, but there's still something to be said for putting your hands on products. And that's what this trade show was all about, was being able to put your hands on things and look at the products. And it was just like the trade shows were, 30 years ago, where you just went from booth to booth and picked things up and talked to the people there about the products. And as you can see here, the typical distributors that you would find at these old ISOA shows are still there, but there's a lot less of these shows. A lot of them are annual now. They're once a year. They used to be, you would have a different trade show in a different location every few months, and it was a really big deal, but it's a lot less so. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and kind of wrap things up. Are there any questions from anybody? James had asked before about OpenCV. Yes, I don't know if this shows, if I put this here, is this the open source vision software? OpenCV.org. That is indeed where you get it. And I'm sure they not only have the free versions of the software, but they also sell tools for software tools, right, that you would have to pay for. That are a little more elaborate. So if you want to get much more detailed on your machine vision, you would buy their tools, I suppose, or you could build your own. If you're a real good Python or C# programmer or whatever platform they use, OpenCV probably has tools in many different languages. So any other questions from anybody? Again, not sure really who all is attending here. Sometimes Phil shows up. Phil, are you here by any chance? I don't hear Phil. So I know James is there because of course he sent a message. And other than that, yeah, I'm going to kind of wrap up. If there aren't any other questions here, again, here's some of the different pictures. Distributors. If you live in the Northeast, you're definitely familiar with Gibson. They're all over the place up there. Every time I go up to the Boston or Maine area or Pennsylvania, they're all over that area. I think they're a Cognex distributor and probably a robot distributor also. That's why they're showing here. Phase 1 and First Vision were very helpful again in explaining a lot of things to me. So again, I think they're from the area up there. Matrox, big name. Go to their website. Check out Matrox. I don't know if it's still matrox.com or you have to go to Zebra, but if you type in Matrox in a search engine, I'm sure you'll find it. And of course, Edmund Scientific, big player in the area. Some of these other names, much less so. right? I've never heard of PCAT or VCOW or JAI, but they were at the show showing lots of good products too. So that is pretty much it for me today. For those of you who know the YouTube channel, you can go to Automatic-I on YouTube and see lots of old webinars. The next webinar, I do these about every 2 weeks. The next one will be October 29th, about 2 weeks from today. And I don't know what the topic will be yet. I have a few possible guests lined up. I haven't done in-person guests for a while. Check out community.automationllc.com. This is open to anybody, IO Central. We kind of have a new logo. I'll have to put that on here to kind of share that too. But for those of you who attended, thank you very much. For those of you who are seeing this on YouTube, thank you also. By the way, if you're wondering about the strange bandage on my head, yeah, I had this done yesterday, and it's not pleasant to look at underneath, so I had to cover it up with a big white bandage. But thank you for attending, and we'll see you the next time.